Hello everyone, welcome back. This week I'm really excited to dive into the book of Jonah. This week's topic is going to be pretty deep. It's going to be very real for most people. It is to me. And it's something that I think a lot of Christians in today's world need to hear. Because there's a lot of us today who are called or being pushed towards something by God, but we're not willing to go ahead and do whatever He's calling us to do. And I mean, I don't know what that is for you, and I know what it is for me. And I feel like Jonah sets the example as to how we're supposed to be obedient to God. And it could be just taking leadership in the church. Maybe it is missions abroad that God's calling you to do. So I said, I don't know what that is for you. But I encourage you to examine your life, examine what God's called you to do, examine your spiritual gifts, and see where God is leading you to minister to the world. We've all got our own duties and obligations as Christians, and we need to be doing the best we can to deliver the gospel to all nations. So please read with me in Jonah chapter 1. We're going to read all of chapter 1. I'm going to go through and kind of summarize a few, really chapters 2 and 3, and then we're going to read a little bit more in chapter 4. But to start, we're going to read in chapter 1. As always, I encourage you to read with me. Pull out your Bible and read. In Jonah chapter 1, we'll start. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because their wickedness has confronted me. However, Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the Lord's presence. Then the Lord hurled a violent wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose on the sea that the ship threatened to break apart. The sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his God. They threw the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten the load. Meanwhile, Jonah had gone down to the lowest part of the vessel and had stretched out and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain approached him and said, "What are you doing, sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Maybe this God will consider us and we won't perish." "Come on," the sailors said to each other. "Let's cast lots. Then we'll know who is to blame for this trouble we're in." So they cast lots, and the lot singled out Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us who is to blame for this trouble we're in. What is your business and where are you from? What is your country and what people are you from?" He answered them, "I am a Hebrew. I worship Yahweh, the God of the heavens, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were even more afraid and said to him, "What is this you've done?" The men knew he was fleeing from the Lord's presence because he had told them. So they said to him, "What should we do to you to calm the sea that's against us?" For the sea was getting worse and worse. He answered them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, so it may quiet down for you. For I know that I am to blame for this violent storm that is against you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they couldn't because the sea was raging against them more and more. So they called out to the Lord, "Please, Yahweh, don't let us perish because of this man's life, and don't charge us with innocent blood. For you, Yahweh, have done just as you pleased." Then they picked up Jonah and threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. The men feared the Lord even more, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. Now the Lord had appointed a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the fish 3 days and 3 nights. So as we look at this first part of Jonah, this is one of the most well-known stories that is told in the Christian faith. It's told to kids starting at a young age if they were in church. It's just a very, very common story. But as I said earlier, it's got some really good examples of how we are supposed to be obedient to God. It starts out with immediately God calls Jonah and tells him to go out to the city of Nineveh and preach against them, that their wickedness, that their sins were bad, and that they were getting to be ready to be confronted for their sins. We quickly see that Jonah has no plans. He does not want to do that. He runs from God as if that's going to work. But he gets on a ship and he ends up putting other people in danger and causing issues for other people because he's denying God's will. He's not willing to go do what God's called him to do. And it gets to the point where, as we all know, Jonah is thrown overboard. He's thrown into the raging sea and is eaten by a great fish. And now we see that Jonah's attitude's kind of starting to change, but as we're going to find out in chapter 4, it doesn't seem like Jonah's attitude changed because of the need to obey God, but instead it was more because he was in distress, as we're going to find out in chapter 4, where God teaches him a lesson about his attitude towards the situation. So chapter 2 is really Jonah praying to God. Jonah is really looking to God and praying to God from the belly of this fish, asking God to give him another chance, really, so that he can be saved from the sea, so that he doesn't die in this fish. And he's continually praying. He's really looking to God in this situation, this nasty, disgusting situation, to see God place his merciful hand on Jonah, which is ironic considering what Jonah's going to do when God does the same here in the next chapter. The next chapter, Jonah does what God called him to do. Jonah gets up, he goes to the city, and he preaches the message that God told him. He tells them that in 40 days Nineveh will be demolished. And the men of Nineveh turned. We see that just in the obedience of one man, willing to prophesy to this group of people in Nineveh, it doesn't say some of the men in Nineveh. It doesn't say a few of the men in Nineveh. It says the men of Nineveh believed in God. The men changed their ways and switched directions and focused on the one true God, which is Yahweh, the God that Jonah prophesied to them about. One man is all that took, because one man followed in the will of God, and he didn't start in the will of God. But God brought him to a point to where Jonah couldn't take it anymore, and eventually he surrendered to God's will. And then we see at the end of this, God shows mercy on Nineveh. Verse 10 of chapter 3 says, Then God saw their actions, that they had turned from their evil ways. So God relented from the disaster he had threatened to do to them, and he did not do it. That's important, because God is showing his merciful hand in all of this. He showed mercy to Jonah and the fish. He's showing mercy to the people in Nineveh at the time of Jonah's preaching. And then we see Jonah's attitude apparently hasn't seemed to really change about the situation, because he's still not happy with the city of Nineveh. As we're going to pick up in Jonah chapter 4, verse 5 through the end of the chapter. It says, But Jonah was greatly displeased and became furious. Now let's pick up in verse 1. But Jonah was greatly displeased and became furious. He prayed to the Lord, Please, Lord, isn't this what I said while I was still in my own country? That's why I fled toward Tarshish in the first place. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to become angry, rich in faithful love, and one who relents from sending disaster. And now, Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live. The Lord asked, Is it right for you to be angry? Jonah left the city and sat down east of it. He made himself a shelter there and sat in its shade to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord appointed a plant, and it grew up to provide shade over Jonah's head to ease his discomfort. Jonah was greatly pleased with the plant. When dawn came the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, and it withered. As the sun was rising, God appointed a scorching east wind. The sun beat down so much on Jonah's head that he almost fainted and he wanted to die. He said, It's better for me to die than to live. Then God asked Jonah, Is it right for you to be angry about the plant? Yes, he replied, It is right. I'm angry enough to die. So the Lord said, You cared about the plant which you did not labor over and did not grow. It appeared in a night and perished in a night. Should I not care about the great city of Nineveh, which has more than 120,000 people who cannot distinguish between their right and their left, as well as many animals? Jonah did not have a good attitude, even after this was all over. And God used Jonah and his poor attitude, expecting the city to be destroyed. He used that to turn a city towards him. A man who was not willing to follow in God's will, and when he did not do so with good attitude, and actually went back east of the city, sat under a shelter, and watched for the city to be destroyed. And then God teaches him a lesson by giving him a plant and taking it away, and telling Jonah, should I not care for the city, which doesn't know how to distinguish between their right and their left? God cared for the people, and God used one man who had a bad attitude, and at first didn't even follow his will, to deliver the gospel. The next thing, the big question I have this week is, what is your Nineveh? Or where is your Nineveh? What is God calling you to do for him in this life that, upon reflection, you don't really want to do? Something that doesn't seem like it's something that you could do. Moses said he couldn't speak to the masses, but instead ended up delivering the 10 Commandments. What is God calling you to do? What is God calling you to do for him? Is he calling you to surrender to the ministry? Is he calling you to talk to that person at work? Is he calling you to go overseas and be a missionary to those who may have never heard the gospel? What is your Nineveh? We all have one. We all have that thing inside us that God is pulling us to do, and we don't know how we're going to do it. And we really don't want to do it. The same was with me when I surrendered to preach. I did not like speaking in front of people. I didn't like it. But in surrendering to God, he has used me to deliver his message. And it's up to him to use us. It's nothing that we do. It's nothing that we are physically capable of, but only through the gift of the Spirit of God are we able to deliver the gospel message to people. So viewer, this week I challenge you to examine your life and find your Nineveh. And without hesitation, with a good positive attitude, going at it as if you're going at it joyfully in Christ, go towards your Nineveh. Work towards the will of God. I challenge you to find that this week. As always, thank you for watching. God bless.